A single mark on skin can carry more weight than 1,000 official documents. The early morning fog rolled across the perimeter of a restricted United States Navy facility located near the Coastal Operations Zone, where security lights cut through the haze in steady intervals, revealing structured concrete pathways and controlled access checkpoints. At the main entry gate, Mark Sullivan stood quietly under observation, his posture calm and unchanging, dressed in a plain dark jacket that showed signs of long field wear but carried no visible active military insignia. His presence did not match the expectations of standard clearance personnel, and that discrepancy alone had triggered a formal review request through the facility's internal verification channel. Lieutenant Ethan Brooks stood near the checkpoint console, reviewing preliminary identity flags on a secured display terminal while maintaining strict procedural discipline, his attention divided between protocol enforcement and situational observation. Security personnel around him maintained standard posture, but their focus had shifted subtly toward the individual at the gate, whose silence and composure created a tension that was not rooted in aggression, but in uncertainty of classification. Mark did not attempt to explain or justify his presence, nor did he display visible frustration. Instead, he remained still, his gaze directed toward the facility interior as if observing a space he had already known in a different context and time. The communication channel between the gate and internal command remained active, transmitting a request for higher-level verification due to inconsistencies in available clearance records. Inside the facility command section, the report had already reached supervisory attention, where a notification was escalated to Vice Admiral Robert Caldwell, who was briefed on the presence of an individual with partial classified service indicators and incomplete but unusually structured historical data correlation. The Admiral did not respond immediately with instruction, instead pausing in silent evaluation as the initial fragments of information were presented through secure briefing format. At the gate, Lieutenant Brooks instructed standard observation continuation, ensuring no escalation in physical interaction while maintaining controlled containment protocol. The environment remained stable, yet every individual present could sense a gradual shift in operational tone, as if the situation was no longer purely administrative, but had entered a category requiring deeper institutional awareness. Mark Sullivan remained unchanged in posture, his calmness not performing for attention, but existing as a consistent state independent of external evaluation. Subtle wind moved across the open entry area, carrying faint sound from distant naval operations, while security cameras tracked every angle of the subject without interruption. Lieutenant Brooks reviewed updated identity fragments as they appeared on his terminal, noticing inconsistencies that did not align with standard civilian or inactive personnel records, prompting a secondary verification request to classified archives. At that moment, the situation transitioned from routine access review into structured identity investigation, where every detail carried increased significance, and every observation had the potential to redefine the classification of the individual standing silently at the gate. The structured silence at the facility gate deepened as Lieutenant Ethan Brooks escalated the identity verification process through secured channels, forwarding the inconsistent record fragments into a restricted Navy archival query system designed for cross-referencing classified personnel histories. The initial response delay created a controlled tension in the environment, where every second of silence carried operational significance rather than uncertainty, and Mark Sullivan remained motionless at the gate, his posture unchanged and his attention steady toward the interior of the base, as if the verification process itself held no personal weight. Inside the command center, the request reached an intermediate review layer where data comparison protocols began aligning partial identifiers, but the system returned incomplete matches that triggered an automatic escalation flag due to potential correlation with redacted operational history files. Vice Admiral Robert Caldwell received the updated briefing through a secure internal channel, and for the first time the situation shifted from routine access review into a category requiring personal attention at command authority level. The Admiral did not respond immediately with instruction, instead pausing as the fragmented data displayed on his terminal began forming a pattern that was not yet fully visible, but carried structural familiarity that suggested prior exposure within classified operational contexts. At the gate, Lieutenant Brooks maintained strict procedural control, instructing all security personnel to hold position and continue observation without escalation, while his attention remained fixed on the evolving data stream updating on his console. The security team around him adjusted their stance subtly, not from instruction but from instinctive recognition that the situation had moved beyond standard protocol engagement. Mark Sullivan remained unchanged, his stillness becoming more pronounced against the increasing procedural activity surrounding him, and his presence began to register less as an external variable and more as a fixed point within the unfolding verification process. The communication line from command remained open, transmitting incremental updates as additional database layers were accessed, revealing structured references that were partially redacted but consistent with elite operational classification patterns associated with specialized naval units. Lieutenant Brooks noted the shift in classification tone within the system interface, where standard civilian or inactive personnel categories no longer applied cleanly to the subject under review. The atmosphere at the gate transitioned from controlled observation into procedural anticipation, as if the environment itself was waiting for a confirmation that had not yet been fully articulated. Inside the command center, Vice Admiral Caldwell leaned slightly forward as another fragment of data populated the secure display, and the alignment of identifiers began triggering recognition pathways linked to historical operational records stored under high restriction clearance. The Admiral's expression remained controlled, but the pause in his movement indicated that the information being processed carried significance beyond routine personnel verification, entering a domain where memory and classified history intersected with present evaluation. At the gate, Lieutenant Brooks received a secondary alert indicating that the subject's record correlation had reached a threshold requiring direct command authorization for further declassification access. And at that moment, the situation stabilized into a state of suspended confirmation where all present understood that the next verification response would determine the true classification identity of the individual standing silently outside the restricted naval facility. The verification process continued to escalate as fragmented identity data from secure naval archives converged into a narrowing classification field, where each new layer of declassification request required explicit authorization from higher command authority, reinforcing the significance of the individual standing at the gate. Lieutenant Ethan Brooks maintained strict procedural discipline, monitoring both the incoming data stream and the physical subject, while the security perimeter remained unchanged but emotionally charged by the increasing weight of institutional attention. Mark Sullivan continued to stand in complete stillness, his presence unaffected by the expanding scope of investigation, as if the process unfolding around him was not a revelation, but a form of confirmation long expected within an established but unseen timeline. Inside the command center, Vice Admiral Robert Caldwell received a structured update indicating that the subject's partial record correlation had now intersected with multiple redacted operational files tied to elite naval units known for high-level classified missions. And this intersection triggered a controlled pause in administrative processing as the system required direct command validation before proceeding further. The Admiral reviewed the newly surfaced data fragments in silence, his attention fixed on patterns that were not immediately explicit but carried recognizable structural signatures associated with specialized operational history, causing a subtle but noticeable shift in his posture as recognition began forming beneath procedural analysis. At the gate, Lieutenant Brooks received confirmation that the next level of access had been granted under Vice Admiral Authority review, and the environment shifted again into a deeper state of controlled anticipation where all personnel understood that the identity resolution phase was approaching its decisive moment. The security team maintained position, but their focus tightened, reflecting the awareness that they were no longer observing a routine verification but participating in a classified recognition sequence. Mark Sullivan's stillness remained unchanged, yet within the context of the escalating system response, his presence now functioned as the central reference point for all ongoing evaluation. In the command center, additional archival layers began revealing partial operational references linked to specialized unit activity, each fragment reinforcing the probability that the subject had once operated within a highly restricted classification tier, though full confirmation still required final authority acknowledgement. Vice Admiral Caldwell did not issue immediate verbal instruction, instead allowing the system to complete its structured alignment of historical data, and in that silence the atmosphere within the command center mirrored the controlled tension present at the gate. Lieutenant Brooks observed the terminal output transition from uncertain correlation to high probability classification match, signaling that the identity verification process was entering its final confirmation stage. The procedural environment across both locations synchronized into a unified state of anticipation, where every second of delay amplified the significance of the impending recognition outcome. At this point, the system no longer treated the subject as an unknown variable, but as a potentially classified legacy operator whose records had remained dormant within restricted naval archives, awaiting authoritative acknowledgement to fully restore official identity status. The identity verification sequence entered a decisive phase as the Naval Archival System completed a high-level correlation sweep across multiple restricted databases, generating a consolidated profile layer that now required formal confirmation from Vice Admiral Robert Caldwell before any final classification could be assigned. Inside the command center, the Admiral reviewed the compiled data with controlled silence, his attention fixed on the structured alignment of operational fragments that were no longer fragmented in isolation, but forming a coherent historical pattern associated with elite naval service history. Each segment of information displayed on the secure terminal reinforced the probability that the individual at the gate was not an unauthorized presence, but a previously classified operator whose records had been intentionally sealed under legacy operational protocols. At the facility gate, Lieutenant Ethan Brooks maintained strict procedural posture, monitoring the final verification stage while ensuring that all security personnel remained in controlled observation mode without escalation, as the situation had fully transitioned into a command-level identity resolution event. Mark Sullivan remained completely still, his presence unchanged by the increasing institutional weight surrounding him, while the environment around him shifted from uncertainty to structured recognition in gradual but irreversible stages. The communication channel between gate security and command remained active, transmitting real-time updates indicating that the subject's historical data now matched multiple redacted operational entries tied to high-level naval unit assignments, each entry requiring clearance beyond standard access authority. Vice Admiral Caldwell observed a final alignment of classification markers that triggered a silent recognition response within the system interface, indicating that the subject's identity was no longer speculative but converging toward confirmed legacy status under restricted military designation. The Admiral did not immediately issue a verbal directive, instead holding a prolonged moment of evaluation as the implications of the matched records extended beyond administrative verification and into institutional memory acknowledgement. At the gate, Lieutenant Brooks received confirmation that the classification threshold had been exceeded and that the subject's identity profile now required formal acknowledgement protocol rather than continued investigative processing. The security perimeter remained unchanged, yet the psychological tone of the environment shifted significantly as personnel recognized that they were witnessing a rare procedural transition from unknown classification to recognized legacy status. Mark Sullivan's calm posture remained constant, his stillness now interpreted within the evolving context not as absence of response, but as confirmation of composure consistent with high-level operational history. Inside the command center, additional archival references surfaced, each one reinforcing structured connections to specialized naval unit activity that had previously been removed from active visibility due to classification protection measures. Vice Admiral Caldwell finally leaned slightly forward as the final verification layer completed its structured match sequence, presenting a consolidated identity profile that aligned with restricted operational history files stored under secure legacy designation. The atmosphere across both command and gate locations synchronized into complete procedural silence, indicating that the verification process had reached its conclusion phase where institutional acknowledgement would replace all remaining uncertainty. At this moment, The system no longer treated the individual as a subject under review, but as a confirmed entity within historical naval records requiring formal recognition protocol initiation. The final verification layer completed its structured alignment across the restricted naval archival system, producing a consolidated identity profile that now carried full classification confirmation pending formal acknowledgement from Vice Admiral Robert Caldwell. Inside the command center, the Admiral reviewed the completed profile in absolute silence as the interface displayed a fully reconstructed operational history sequence, no longer fragmented or partially redacted, but assembled into a coherent legacy record indicating long-term elite naval service under highly restricted deployment conditions. The weight of the information created a controlled pause in the command environment, where no immediate verbal instruction was issued, because the significance of the confirmation required procedural respect beyond standard administrative response. At the facility gate, Lieutenant Ethan Brooks received the final transmission confirming that the subject's identity had transitioned from active investigation status to verified legacy classification, triggering a mandatory protocol shift from security observation to formal recognition posture. Security personnel around the gate adjusted their stance subtly, responding to the updated command tone transmitted through internal channels as the operational atmosphere transitioned from uncertainty into structured acknowledgement. Mark Sullivan remained in the same position, unchanged in posture, but the context surrounding him had fundamentally shifted, transforming his presence from a subject of verification into a confirmed historical operator within naval legacy records. The communication line between gate and command remained open, now transmitting acknowledgement instructions rather than investigative queries, signaling the end of identity uncertainty. Inside the command center, Vice Admiral Caldwell studied the final operational summary, which referenced multiple classified missions and specialized unit assignments that had remained sealed under long-term protection protocols, each entry reinforcing the authenticity of the reconstructed service history. The Admiral's expression remained controlled, but the silence in the room reflected a transition from evaluation to recognition, where institutional protocol required acknowledgement of verified legacy status. At the gate, Lieutenant Brooks initiated the formal recognition procedure, instructing personnel to maintain respectful formation while updating system status indicators to reflect confirmed classification. The environment stabilized into complete procedural silence, with no further investigative activity remaining active, as all systems had transitioned into acknowledgement mode. Mark Sullivan's stillness now aligned with the final state of recognition, where his presence was no longer interpreted through uncertainty, but through validated historical significance within naval records. Inside the command center, Vice Admiral Caldwell authorized the completion of the recognition sequence, allowing the system to finalize the legacy classification and lock the record under protected historical archives. Across both locations, the operational atmosphere settled into a unified state of institutional acknowledgement, where every participant understood that the verification process had concluded and that the individual at the center of the gate was no longer under review, but officially recognized within the highest tier of naval historical record preservation. The legacy recognition sequence transitioned into its final operational stage as the Naval Archival System completed its formal status update, locking the verified identity of Mark Sullivan into the highest tier of restricted historical records under Vice Admiral Authority authorization. Inside the command center, the atmosphere remained controlled and silent as Vice Admiral Robert Caldwell reviewed the finalized classification output displayed across the secure interface, confirming that all reconstructed operational data had been fully validated and permanently sealed under legacy designation protocol. The Admiral did not issue immediate verbal commentary, as the weight of institutional acknowledgement required procedural silence rather than administrative reaction, reflecting the significance of confirming a long-classified operator within official naval history. At the facility gate, Lieutenant Ethan Brooks received the final instruction sequence indicating that all investigative procedures had concluded and that the operational status must now be transitioned into formal recognition posture, requiring all security personnel to shift from verification stance into respectful acknowledgement alignment. The surrounding personnel complied without hesitation. adjusting their positions in disciplined silence as the environment changed from procedural evaluation to institutional recognition, where every action now reflected confirmation rather than inquiry. Mark Sullivan remained in the same position, his posture unchanged and steady, while the meaning of his presence had fully transformed within the system, no longer interpreted as uncertain identity, but as confirmed legacy operator status preserved within classified naval archives. The communication channel between command and gate displayed final closure indicators, signaling that no further data retrieval or identity validation processes were authorized, as the system had reached irreversible confirmation state. Inside the command center, Vice Admiral Caldwell observed the final archival summary, which displayed structured references to past specialized operational deployments, all now unified under a single verified identity record that had been dormant for extended classification duration. The Admiral's attention remained fixed on the data, not as new information, but as confirmed historical acknowledgement that required institutional respect rather than analytical review. At the gate, Lieutenant Brooks initiated the formal acknowledgement protocol, instructing all personnel to maintain respectful formation while the system updated the subject's classification status to officially recognized legacy designation within naval records. The environment across the facility stabilized into complete procedural silence, where even routine operational sounds appeared diminished under the weight of formal recognition. Mark Sullivan's presence remained steady at the center of observation, now fully integrated into the recognized historical framework of naval service, with all uncertainty removed from classification layers. Inside the command center, Vice Admiral Caldwell authorized the final closure of the recognition sequence, allowing the system to permanently archive the identity profile under protected historical preservation status, ensuring that all associated operational records would remain sealed but officially validated. Across both the command center and the gate, the entire operational structure settled into a unified state of acknowledgement, where hierarchy, protocol, and personnel alignment reflected a completed transition from investigation to recognition, marking the end of identity uncertainty and the establishment of confirmed legacy within the institutional memory of the United States Navy. The formal recognition state across the naval facility transitioned into a stabilized institutional silence as the legacy confirmation sequence reached full completion status within the classified archival system, permanently sealing Mark Sullivan's identity record under Vice Admiral authorized historical designation. Inside the command center, Vice Admiral Robert Caldwell remained in controlled silence as he observed the finalized system output, confirming that all operational fragments, mission references, and classified deployment records had been successfully unified into a single verified legacy profile. The Admiral's posture remained steady, reflecting not surprise but institutional acknowledgement, as the significance of the record extended beyond procedural verification and into historical preservation of elite operational service within the United States Navy. At the facility gate, Lieutenant Ethan Brooks maintained formal stance as the final acknowledgement protocol continued across all security and command channels, ensuring that every personnel unit within the perimeter had transitioned from investigative posture into recognition alignment under direct command instruction. The environment had fully shifted from analytical verification to ceremonial-level procedural acknowledgement without ceremony, where silence itself carried institutional meaning. Mark Sullivan remained at the center of observation, his composure unchanged, while the meaning of his presence had now been fully absorbed into the official structure of naval historical recognition, removing any remaining ambiguity regarding identity classification. Across the communication network, all investigative channels displayed closure status, confirming that no further verification queries were active and that the system had entered permanent archival mode under restricted access protection. Inside the command center, Vice Admiral Caldwell reviewed the final confirmation summary one last time, ensuring that the classification lock was properly applied, preserving the integrity of the legacy record and preventing any future procedural reclassification without high-level authorization override. Lieutenant Brooks received final instruction to maintain respectful operational posture, as the facility entered a unified state of acknowledgement where all personnel actions reflected institutional recognition rather than evaluation or uncertainty. The security team remained aligned in disciplined silence, their focus no longer on identification, but on the significance of confirmed historical status, now officially attributed to the individual at the gate. Mark Sullivan's presence remained steady and unchanged, yet the surrounding context had fully transformed, embedding his identity within the permanent record of naval operational history as a verified legacy operator. Inside the command center, Vice Admiral Caldwell authorized the final archival sealing process, ensuring that all associated classified data would remain protected under long-term preservation protocol while maintaining official recognition status within restricted historical archives. The entire facility settled into complete procedural stillness, where operational activity ceased and institutional acknowledgement became the dominant state of function. Across both command and gate environments, the transition from uncertainty to recognition had fully completed, establishing a unified operational reality where hierarchy, protocol, and personnel alignment reflected a finalized acknowledgement of legacy identity within the United States Navy institutional memory system. The naval facility settled into a sustained state of institutional silence as the legacy recognition protocol stabilized across all operational systems, confirming that the identity of Mark Sullivan had been fully validated and permanently recorded within classified United States Navy historical archives. Inside the command center, Vice Admiral Robert Caldwell maintained a steady and controlled posture. As he observed the final sealed classification output displayed on the secure interface, where the verified identity record now existed as a complete historical file with no remaining gaps or unresolved correlation flags. The Admiral did not issue additional directives, as the procedural requirements had already been fulfilled and the situation had transitioned beyond active verification into permanent acknowledgement status under Legacy Preservation Authority. At the facility gate, Lieutenant Ethan Brooks held formal position while the security perimeter remained intact but functionally redefined, no longer operating as an investigative checkpoint, but as a controlled recognition environment under direct command authorization. The personnel under his supervision remained aligned in disciplined silence, reflecting the institutional shift from uncertainty to confirmation, where every individual understood that the operational purpose of the moment had changed from questioning identity to honoring verified historical service. Mark Sullivan remained centered within the field of observation, his posture unchanged, his presence steady and composed, while the context surrounding him had fully transformed into official recognition status within naval records. Across the communication network, all active verification channels remained closed, replaced by archival confirmation indicators that signaled the completion of all identity-related processes and the permanent sealing of classified operational history under protected system protocols. Inside the command center, Vice Admiral Caldwell reviewed the final integrity summary of the archived record, ensuring that the classification lock remained stable and that no secondary modification pathways were available without high-level authorization override, thereby preserving the authenticity and continuity of the historical file. Lieutenant Brooks received confirmation that all procedural requirements had been finalized, and he instructed the security team to maintain formal acknowledgement posture, ensuring that the environment reflected the completed transition from investigation to recognition. The atmosphere across the facility remained steady and controlled, with no operational urgency present, only institutional acknowledgement of verified legacy status. Mark Sullivan's presence continued to function as the central reference point of the environment, not as a subject of review, but as a confirmed historical operator whose service record had been fully restored within official naval documentation systems. Inside the command center, Vice Admiral Caldwell observed the final system status indicator shift to permanent archive mode, confirming that the identity record had been sealed under Legacy Preservation Protocol, ensuring long-term protection and restricted access continuity. The Admiral's focus remained steady, reflecting institutional responsibility rather than emotional reaction, as the significance of the recognition extended into the broader framework of naval historical preservation and operational memory integrity. At the gate, Lieutenant Brooks maintained disciplined alignment with all personnel, ensuring that the final state of acknowledgement was preserved without deviation, while the surrounding environment remained quiet and stable under full procedural completion status. The entire facility now functioned under a unified condition of recognition rather than evaluation, where all systems, personnel, and command structures reflected the completed verification outcome. Mark Sullivan remained motionless at the center of this environment, fully integrated into the institutional recognition framework, his identity no longer subject to analysis, but permanently recorded as verified legacy status within the United States Navy archival system. Across both command and operational levels, the transition had fully stabilized into permanent acknowledgement, marking the end of uncertainty and the establishment of confirmed historical identity within protected naval memory infrastructure. The final state of recognition within the United States Navy facility stabilized into permanent institutional silence as the legacy classification record of Mark Sullivan remained fully sealed and verified within protected historical archives under Vice Admiral Robert Caldwell authorization. Inside the command center, Vice Admiral Caldwell maintained a composed and steady presence as he observed the final archival status indicator confirming that the identity file had transitioned into irreversible legacy preservation mode, ensuring that all operational history associated with the subject would remain officially recognized, yet securely protected under restricted access protocols. There was no further administrative requirement, no remaining verification task, and no additional procedural escalation available, as the system had completed its full recognition cycle from initial uncertainty to confirmed historical identity. At the facility gate, Lieutenant Ethan Brooks stood in formal alignment with the remaining security personnel, all of whom maintained disciplined silence reflecting the completion of operational duty in the identity verification process. The environment that had once been defined by investigative tension had now fully transformed into a controlled acknowledgement zone, where the presence of the recognized individual carried institutional significance rather than procedural uncertainty. Mark Sullivan remained at the center of the scene, his posture unchanged, his calm presence now fully integrated into the confirmed historical framework of naval service, no longer evaluated or analyzed, but formally acknowledged as part of the United States Navy's preserved legacy record. Across all communication systems, verification channels displayed final closure status, confirming that no additional data queries or classification checks were active, and that the identity confirmation process had been permanently concluded under authorized command oversight. Inside the command center, Vice Admiral Caldwell reviewed the final system integrity confirmation one last time, ensuring that the archival lock remained stable and that the legacy record could not be altered without explicit high-level override authority, thereby preserving both historical accuracy and institutional continuity. The Admiral's posture remained steady and reflective of procedural completion, not emotional response, as the significance of the recognition extended into the broader framework of military historical preservation. At the gate, Lieutenant Brooks issued final procedural confirmation to maintain respectful formation, ensuring that all personnel upheld acknowledgement posture as the facility remained in a unified state of recognition. The security perimeter remained active but functionally redefined, no longer serving as an investigative checkpoint, but as a formal recognition environment under command directive. Mark Sullivan's presence continued to anchor the scene, symbolizing the transition from anonymity to confirmed legacy status within official naval records. Inside the command center, Vice Admiral Caldwell authorized the permanent closure of the recognition cycle, confirming that all data had been fully archived under protected historical designation and that the subject's identity was now permanently recorded within the institutional memory of the United States Navy. The entire facility operated under complete procedural stillness, where hierarchy, personnel, and systems reflected the finalized outcome of identity confirmation. Across both command and operational levels, the transition reached its absolute completion, establishing a unified state of acknowledgement in which uncertainty no longer existed, and the legacy of the verified operator remained permanently preserved within the official structure of naval history.